to know about God.
Then, as it grew, it became more of a program and discipleship, and people that already knew the Lord would come.
Everybody had something to do every day, whether you were working in the office and addressing envelopes, or whether you were cooking, or whether you were on a gardening group.
But the goal was to see people discipled and really to see people get to know Jesus through the people that we discipled.
A new tension was emerging. As money followed success, Keith grew uncomfortable. He couldn't stomach the idea of people paying to be ministered to.
Keith was very passionate about not charging for the gospel.
He had really felt that the Lord had been asking him to do something that he didn't have the nerve to do.
And he did not want anybody to look at him and think that he was making money off the gospel.
He was impressed that all Christian artists should do offering concerts, should not sell tickets.
There was a lot of misunderstanding around it.
He was the first one really to bring in the idea of having big concerts where you didn't pay anything to come hear him sing.
I remember being in the back seat of a car coming from a Riverside concert that he did when Buck Herring was with him. And they got into an argument about whether or not it was right to charge for Christian concerts.
So he thought that was selling the gospel, and that wasn't right.
And Keith just kept saying, if it's ministry, you cannot charge.
He put the burr under the saddle blanket, and I had to start to keep digging and find out why it was there,
He challenged everybody to be in that no compromise level.
Artistically, it was a time of uncertainty. With the release of No Compromise, Keith's contract obligation to Sparrow was over. Though he was unsure of the next move, he continued his constant touring.
When Keith finished his second album, by that time he was very well known.
It was going like crazy, and the 2-record contract I had with him was over.
Yeah, I mean, I had some guys, I'm not going to name names, from other labels offering to, slip me $25,000 under the table if I could get Keith to sign with their record company because he was that hot.
Sparrow still wanted him to re-sign, but there were other record labels courting him.
One of the record companies that was trying to lure him to a contract offered him stuff.
He felt like he was being taken up on a high mountaintop and being tempted by the devil.
I mean, he was like a commodity.
Keith really went back and thought, you know what? This isn't who we are. Who we are is Billy Ray. Who we are is the relationship that we have with Sparrow.
I negotiated with him for another 2 years.
Keith now feared that he had compromised. He had signed a second contract with Sparrow and felt obligated to keep his word. On the other hand, he was convinced that to fulfill that contract would amount to selling the gospel for a profit. Keith was also concerned that some people who needed to hear his music wouldn't be able to afford it.
To obey is better than sacrifice. I don't need your money, I want your life.
He was just conscience-stricken because he thought he really missed the Lord, even in re-signing with Sparrow.
And he felt like he was not supposed to sell records.
And he said, I've got to go ask Billy Ray if he'll let me out of my contract.
I can still see him to this day on my back porch.
You know, when you've gone to tell somebody something that you think is probably going to be bad news and they don't know it yet.
And he said, I want out of my contract.
Keith told him, that he really felt like he missed the Lord, that he loved him. It wasn't a personal thing, but that he thought he was supposed to be giving his albums away.
Well, that wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear. My biggest selling artist wanted to give his records away.
You could hear a pin drop for a minute. But I don't think it took Billy Ray very long.
If God told him to do this, and he certainly is telling me to do this through Keith, and I had no other choice, really.
I remember feeling really surprised that he released him so quickly and so easily, but at the same time, not so surprised.
People think I was a great saint for doing that, but it was what God said, and you do what God says.
Keith moved from Sparrow as a label, while a different sort of move was looming for their community.
About the same time that the Lord was releasing us from Sparrow, we were also feeling released from California.
It was right after that that we really thought about moving to Texas.
We went specifically so we could have more land and really be out of the city, because some of the people we were trying to help, we just thought there's just too many temptations.
I can remember Keith standing on the corner by the freeway, kind of waving goodbye to his family.
We were a sight in Woodland Hills, but we were really a sight when we got to East Texas, because we were just a scraggly bunch of hippies.
We drove up that driveway to which was just the ranch house, when there was just one house.
It was just a little house and had a barn. Quite quickly, we filled that up and then had to start building other buildings, other structures. And Keith was flying out so much that it was a bit of a trek to the Dallas airport. So we thought, well, a little commuter plane would be good. And we had enough property in Texas to be able to put a little airstrip in for commuting back and forth to the airport.
After the move, Keith formed a new ministry label, Pretty Good Records. The Green's second child, Bethany Grace, was born even as Keith plunged into the creation of his third record. So You Want to Go Back to Egypt was more musically impulsive than Keith's previous records, even boasting Bob Dylan on harmonica. But it wasn't anything stylistic that shocked the industry. It was Keith's radical plan for distributing the record.
He said, I don't believe people should pay to hear the gospel.
He wanted to figure out some way to get outside the system.
Pretty Good Records came out of that, and that's out of his desire not to want to charge anything for ministry whatsoever.
Of course, he had a mailing list of well over 300,000 people when he actually started Pretty Good Records and went outside the system and started offering his records for whatever people could afford.
And there were some times where a check would come in for $1 that would say this is all I could afford, and sometimes a check would come in for $5,000.
So You Want to Go Back to Egypt was a really diverse album. There was a lot of humor on it. Like the title song was a funny song. We just cracked ourselves up writing it. We laughed so hard we were crying.
Moses, put down your pen. What? Oh no, man again.
Part of the problem with Keith wanting to give the album away is what it did to all the other artists as well who had their albums in bookstores.
Nobody understood it. He tried to give his records through the bookstores and put signs on bookstores. Didn't understand that at all.
The way he did it, because he had so many other tools to make it work, the mailing list, the machinery, the ministry, etc., it wasn't a model that the rest of us could follow necessarily. At least nobody else jumped up and had the courage to follow him. I certainly didn't.
Keith was a constant innovator whose perpetual restlessness drove him to find new creative outlets. With the official formation of Last Days Ministries, he had begun to focus intently on discipleship through the print medium.
When Keith was about to make his first album, he knew it was coming. So as he was touring, he was collecting names saying, I'm going to have an album come out soon. And the album came out. These people wanted it. We mailed out the albums to them. And then he sat there and went, gosh, I've got 6,000 names here.
Keith loved this mailing list. He loved that these were people that he felt close to.
So he felt that we should communicate with them. So we started this little newsletter.
If you'd come in, he'd say, are you on our mailing list? And they would say yes or no, and then he would actually show them where their name was.
They were wise. They understood their audience, and they really spoke into the college dormitory. They spoke into the youth group. They spoke into the heart of kids that had no relationship with Jesus at all.
Just started, sharing our hearts, writing articles, that kind of thing. Keith was a real prolific writer.
It was overwhelming, the amount of letters that we got.
From that point forward, everywhere he went, if people wanted the newsletter, which eventually became a magazine, he'd always gather names.
Well, I'm going to take care of something before we go ahead with the evening. The ministry that I'm from puts out a magazine called the Last Days Newsletter. And it's a free magazine. We don't take advertising. It's just ministry. I write some articles. My wife does. Winky does. Different people in different ministries write articles in it. It also lets you know when other albums are coming out. And if you'd like to get that, we send it out once every 6 weeks. Fill out your name.
That magazine was an amazing phenomenon. Its huge circulation, its youthful appeal, its prophetic edge, the way it spoke to young people right where they were,